free speech protects you from the government. It doesn't protect you from ordinary people. Ordinary people can feel however they want about what you say. The government can't arrest you for making a bad joke about the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that people listening to your joke can't say, hey, that joke sucked and I don't think you should tell it anymore and I'm not going to support you.
How can we live a more ethical life? That's the central question in How to Be Perfect, the correct answer to every moral question, which is out now. It's the debut book from Michael Schur, the creator, writer and executive producer of The Good Place, the award-winning sitcom that made moral philosophy funny. It's also the first philosophy book which has ever made me laugh out loud, except maybe for Nietzsche, and I'm not sure he was doing it on purpose. Schur is also known for his work on The American Office, Parks and Recreation, and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and I'm delighted to say he joins me now on the programme. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. Michael, thanks very much for being with us, and congratulations on the book, which I enjoyed enormously in as much as I understood it, and I understood some, let's say.
I'm glad to hear that I made you laugh at least as hard as Nietzsche did, unintentionally.
I would say you even made me laugh more than Nietzsche did. More than Nietzsche did, yeah.
That's a lofty goal.
And I'm pretty sure you were intending to, so that's definitely a bonus. Look, let's start with The Good Place, right? The Good Place and how it leads to the book. The Good Place was a strange and sort of fantastic sitcom with a great cast, including Kirsten Bell and Ted Danson. But it was based on your idea that good and bad behaviour, if good and bad behaviour was being tallied up and your score was going to send you to an afterlife in the good place or the bad place, and there was a huge amount of philosophical discussion in it and complex thought experiment played out, like the episode on the trolley problem and things like that. How much philosophical study did it require for you in order to write and produce it?
A lot is the answer. I knew very little about the subject. I had taken a couple classes in college, which I'm 46, so college is a long time ago. And when I had the idea, I really liked the idea, but I had a sort of sinking feeling in my stomach that in order to write it properly, I would need to embark on a pretty intense self-taught discovery session of what this stuff was and what it said. So I just kind of started reading. I read a bunch of surveys and compilations, and then I got a couple of professionals to recommend stuff to me. And I wish I could say that I had read everything that I had to read or that I should have read in moral philosophy, but the truth is that in order to accomplish that, I would have done nothing but read until I was 95, and then I would have died and never wrote the show. So, I think I did a fairly good job at covering the basics. And then as the show went on, I continued, and as did the writers, we continued to read stuff. New stuff would come up or people would recommend stuff to us. So it was a pretty consistent kind of course of study over the course of maybe 5 years.
How much study did the cast have to put in as well? Because they always sounded like they understood what they were saying.
I know, they're very good actors, aren't they? Yeah. they would occasionally, we would have sort of mostly casual meetings before we shot an episode or a certain scene, where we would say, okay, here's what the hell you're about to say, and here's what the hell it means. And generally, they're very bright people, and they got the gist of everything that we were doing sort of implicitly. But when there was something that was particularly thorny, we would have a little minor kind of confab and just sort of say, like, here's this theory, here's what it's saying. And but then they're just also really talented. So when the words came out of William Jackson Harper's mouth, they sounded incredibly convincing. They sounded like he was a philosophy professor, because he's a very smart person who is good at acting.
Can you grade them as philosophy students, not as actors? We know they're all excellent actors. I mean, Jamila Jamil has plenty to say about how people should behave online. I wonder, is her grasp of moral philosophy really, really up there?
You know, what was great about each of them is, each of the characters had a sort of specific flaw or Achilles heel, I guess you would call it, some kind of deficit that related to some kind of specific theory. Jamila, her character was, obsessed with appearance, and her motivation for doing everything that she did, even when the thing that she was doing was good, like raising money for charity, it was always done because she wanted to get attention or fame or notoriety or hang out with celebrities or outshine her sister or something. And she completely locked into that idea. Like, that was very easily understood by her. Kristen Bell's character was just a sort of lone wolf, sort of selfish person, and Kristen was an A+ student who completely believed in the theory that would kind of heal her particular wound of being a part of something larger than herself, and and being part of a community. So they all really, and then William Jackson Harper, by the way, he was a strict Kantian. Kantians are very intense people who believe that there is a right and wrong answer to every single question. And Chidi's Achilles' heel was that he froze and could not do anything because he was so afraid of doing the wrong thing. And when I explained his character to him after we hired him for the show, he said, my whole family and my girlfriend are all going to think that you wrote this for me because this is how I really am in real life. So they all really locked into their specific issue and the specific theories that address those issues.
We've got to avoid spoilers, which is frustrating. But did the philosophical journey of The Good Place, did it lead you to surprising places, the conclusions it kind of came to? I guess which we can say, it leads to the book, but about the difficulty, nay, perhaps impossibility of behaving in a moral way.
I think more than leading me to unexpected places, I would say that it confirmed for me what I already believed, which is that this is really hard. That the simple act of trying to be a good person on earth is damn near impossible, and that if you even care one way or the other, whether what you're doing is good or bad, you are doomed to fail constantly in a way that is discouraging. So that was how I felt. That was what my gut told me before I started reading anything, and then reading what I read and understanding it to the degree that I do, it sort of merely confirmed for me how difficult it is to exist on Earth and care one way or the other about your quality of life. So, yeah, that would be. I would say it more confirmed what I believed than surprised me in its revelations.
Well, that leads us pretty neatly to the book. How for you did it come about? How did you get from The Good Place, sending friendly academics urgent emails with the title "Philosophical Emergency" on them, as you said, to writing an actual philosophy book yourself? What on earth made you want to do it?
It was a general sense toward the end of the show that I wasn't quite done thinking about it or talking about it, or maybe that after doing all of that study and talking about these things with really smart and interesting people for half a decade, that I wanted to just coagulate everything that I learned or understood or felt like I understood into one place. Like it was really nothing more than an instinct to keep writing about it, because I really have fallen in love with the subject and have come to believe that it's very, very important. And I further felt that I had gone from a person who understood almost nothing about it to a person who had a decent handle on it. And the journey from point A to point B involved reading a lot of really difficult stuff, having a lot of people explain it to me, talking about it a lot, and then being able to converse about it in a way that I felt was understandable by normal people who aren't PhD students. So I really am grateful for that, because I feel definitely feel like a better person on the other side of it. And so that led me to think like, well, if I could perform this service for other people, if I could sort of translate all of this difficult, thorny stuff into common sense conversational language, that people might get out of it what I got out of it, which was at least some kind of structure or scaffolding that lets me understand better why what I'm doing is good or bad.
Well, so it's unusual for philosophers to worry about or even try to translate their thoughts into sort of ordinary, commonplace, understandable language. Right. And I say that bearing the scars of 3 years studying the damn thing. Are you nervous about how it's going to be received by professional philosophers? Yes,
endlessly nervous, yes. So Todd May was a professor of philosophy who was an advisor on the show and who helped me with the book. And he has assured me that I have not blown it. Like I told him when I asked him to help me that I wanted him to be the philosophical equivalent of a spotter in a gym. Like when you're bench pressing, there's a guy standing next to you so that if you drop the barbell, it won't crush your throat. And I was like, I need you to not keep me from crushing my own throat here. And so he has assured me that I have not made any terrible mistakes. There are philosophy is a discipline of nitpicking, as you well know from having studied it, right? Like everything in philosophy, you say something like, let's assume that things exist. And then 18 philosophers raise their hands and say, not so fast. We can't be sure that things actually exist. So no matter what you write, I'm sure I'm running afoul of various people and their theories and their interpretations of this stuff. There's no avoiding that. I hope that I did a good enough job so that nobody says this is trash and literally throws it in the garbage.
I mean, ethics seem to have been a theme for you in a lot of your work, but it's almost like it took you a while to realise that they were a theme in your work. Like, if you go back to Parks and Recreation, Amy Poehler's character, Leslie Knope, she's sort of driven to do good and be good, but the battle she's fighting are bureaucratic and democratic instead of philosophical. Have you always been aware of this being like a recurring theme?
Yes, although it certainly became obviously more concrete with The Good Place. But yeah, I mean, with Leslie and that show, that was a show that was at least in part about political ethics, which are its own beast and have its own set of rules and are particularly, omnipresent, I would say, in modern life. Right? There is no shortage of stories about political, ethical lapses. Your nation is going through a pretty hilarious one right now with Boris Johnson. Yeah, congratulations. But it's
something that does make you proud, actually, as a Brit at the moment, is how you are being seen by comedy writers around the world. So thank you very much. Well, Boris is
a true gift to comedy writers. There's almost no one you could hand a comedy writer that would be more enjoyable to observe. So, but like it's a classic example of a political ethical lapse, right? Which is, it's almost always the same thing. It's, hey everyone, you have to do this, and then in private, I am going to do the opposite of that. Like that's what you see over and over again. So Leslie was dealing with that sort of ethical lapse, and there have been other shows I've worked on, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine or The Office, that it dealt with corporate ethics or dealt with, the ethics of law enforcement. And so, yeah, I think the subject at some basic level has always been present in my brain. It's just that I made it explicit in the last show that I did.
I mean, Michael Scott in The Office is a fascinating ethical character because he behaves badly constantly, but there's clearly a sort of a core of goodness there, or is there?
No, there certainly is. I would say more than there is with David Brent in the British version, because Michael. Yeah. They both have the same blind spots, right? And that was what Greg Daniels, who adapted the show, really carried over, was these are people who have one self-image, and it is in stark contrast to the image that his coworkers or underlings have of him. So that remained the same. I think the difference in the two characters was a little bit more that Michael wanted to be a good person in a way that David didn't really care about, I think. David wanted to be funny, and he wanted people to love him, and so did Michael Scott. But Michael Scott had a real deep-seated feeling of like, I want to be a good person. I want to be a person who is held in high esteem. He was just a bumbling moron who couldn't quite get there, or at least didn't get there until close to the end of the run of the show, 7 years in. Yeah,
I'm wondering if we're still talking about Boris Johnson there. Sort of could be. Look, but back on ethics then. I mean, it's the big question of The Good Place, and I suppose the book as well. But do you think, is it harder to answer the question of how we can live a more ethical life now than it was, say, well, I was going to say 100 years ago, but even 25 years ago? Modern complexity, is it an enemy of that question?
Even 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 3 years ago, yes. I think the answer is yes. I think that it gets harder every year, partly because we know more about the world every year than we did before. We are more aware of both famous people and non-famous people's ethical lapses. We're hyper aware of corporate malfeasance. So every time we buy something, a tomato or a pair of shoes or anything, someone will tell us that the company that we have just supported is a terrible company. We're hyper aware of athletes' malfeasance. So if we support, like I support Liverpool, and when the Super League scandal was happening, I got a lot of, you're an unethical person for rooting for Liverpool because they're trying to join the Super League. So yeah, there's no escaping it. Like there's a term I try to coin in the book called moral exhaustion, which I'm really hoping will be, my calling card in academic circles. Like I'm really pushing for people to start using this term so I can become famous among academics. And what it means is basically that there is no way to avoid knowing for a fact that you are doing something wrong, because we know everything about the world now in a way we didn't, even 10 years ago, we didn't know as much as we do. So there's a real temptation, I think, to just throw up your hands and say, I give up. It's too hard. Like, I'm not going to try. I'm not going to care one way or another whether what I do is good, because I know that I'm going to run afoul of somebody's rule somewhere. And I think that's the danger with the information age, is that because we're so aware of everything that's wrong, we stop trying to do right. That's what I think we should all try to avoid.
Does that make you personally anxious? I mean, I know Ted Danson, I already said that. I don't think there's a casual bone in his body when he was describing you. And the fact that you return so often to ethics, what is it about you that makes you want to do that, do you think?
It's a good question, and I don't totally know, although I have very old memories of being a very young person and caring about whether I was following rules. I've told the story before, but I have one of my earliest memories is I was on the playground in kindergarten, and the teacher said, okay, everybody line up. And I immediately got into line, and then I looked around at the other kids in the class who were still goofing around, and I remember thinking, what are they doing? This is insane. Like, the teacher said line up. Why are they not lining up? Like, that's what we're supposed to be doing right now. So like, the unkind way to refer to a person like that would be a kiss ass. The kind way to refer to a person like that would be a dutiful, rule-following child who has exhibits good behavior from an early age. But whatever you want to call it, like, that was always in me somewhere. Like, there was some deep-seated desire to understand what was supposed to be the situation, what was supposed to be the rule, and then to follow that rule. So I think I think it's either genetic or it's either nature or very early nurture. I'm not sure which, or whether it's both, but it's always been there somewhere. And so I think as I've gotten older, it's only intensified and kind of matured.
Mm-hmm. How important are ethics to comedy? I don't know if you're aware of the sort of the big comedy fight going on in Britain at the moment. The comedian Jimmy Carr, he made a joke in his Netflix special about the extermination of the Gypsy and Roma populations during the Holocaust, and it was a very bad taste joke, and it's caused an enormous sort of media fuss here. Does morality matter in humor, or are humor and morality different things?
They're certainly different. That exact scenario plays out once a week in the States, I would say, where a comedian says something that is offensive to some group of people, and then there's an uproar, and then people say, the employees of the company who aired the special want it taken down, and then the person who runs the company has to come out and say, we champion free speech here at this company, and blah, 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 blah. It's just this sort of endless cycle that has gotten very boring. They're not the same thing. And look, you are, at least in this country, more so than in England, you're allowed to say whatever you want. But I think the people who are the loudest in declaring that we have free speech in this country and you're allowed to say anything you want, forget two things. One of them is that free speech protects you from the government. It doesn't protect you from ordinary people. Ordinary people can feel however they want about what you say. The government can't arrest you for making a bad joke about the Holocaust. But that doesn't mean that people listening to your joke can't say, hey, that joke sucked and I don't think you should tell it anymore and I'm not going to support you. That's just capitalism, right? That's just people voting with their money and their time to it in a way that has existed from the beginning of the country. The second thing that I think those people forget sometimes is that while, yes, technically speaking, you can say whatever you want to an audience, the audience gets to say whatever they want back, right? Like that's the part of the equation that comedians seem to forget sometimes, because if you say something that people don't like, they're allowed to say, hey, I don't like that, in exactly the same volume that you have said whatever you've said. So you're not being, in quotes, canceled for no reason. You told a joke that people didn't like that was punching down or was offensive or did additional damage to some group of people that has been historically marginalized and shoved off to the side. and people are saying, hey, I don't think you should do that anymore. And it's wild to me that comedians they seem to forget that. Like, we are under no obligation to like what you say. Like, that's just not the way this works. Like, you can say whatever you want, but we don't have to like it. We don't have to not say anything when we don't like it. So, this is like a classic example of, for the first time in the last decade, let's call it, audiences everywhere have gotten more assured in their voice to respond to what comedians say, and the comedians just kind of don't like it. And it's like, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you punch down, if you make fun of some group of people that has been historically marginalized, and people complain about it, that's not that's allowed. Like, we can do that. People can do that. I don't know what to tell you.
And they now have the means to do so, I guess. Do you think
Yes.
that the pandemic has how would I put this, has heightened questions of morality, that we're much more conscious of our moral decisions? If you're talking about, you were talking earlier about jumping a queue, but the idea of people who choose to wear a mask or choose not to wear a mask, choose to be vaccinated, choose not to be vaccinated. They're supposed to isolate, but they don't isolate. These are all moral questions as much as they are any other sort of question, right?
Absolutely. I mean, a friend of mine described the pandemic as a black light. She said that it was basically just revealing things that have always been there in the society in which we live, but we maybe couldn't see. And I think that's a great analogy because, for the first time, I think maybe in history, every single human being on Earth was going through the same exact thing at the same exact time, and the ethical and moral questions that were being asked of us were identical everywhere on the globe. I don't think that's ever happened before. Like, not even World War II was that the case, because there were some countries very far away who had nothing to do with World War II who would just sat it out. And in the case of the pandemic, you had the same exact set of questions being posed to every single person on Earth. What are your responsibilities? How much or how little should you care about other people? Should you wear a mask? Should you get vaccinated? Should you social distance? All that stuff. So it was an incredible laboratory for ethics. And as a result, honestly, it made it a little hard not to make the entire book about the pandemic, because every time I'd be writing about something, I would think, like, what's a good way to illustrate this? Oh, the pandemic. That would be a good way to illustrate it. So, yeah, I think it was never more clear what the right thing to do was, what the consequences of doing the wrong thing were, and then it was never more clear who were the people who bought in to the ethical side of this and who didn't,
When it comes to philosophy generally, and your book is, I'd say your book is occasionally guilty of this, but no more guilty than philosophy tends to be. Does it worry you that often there's a lot of questions, but not a lot of answers? Your book certainly highlights all the questions of how to be perfect. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I now know how to be perfect.
Well, you got to read it again. That's all I can tell you. No, of course, that is the problem, I guess, for lack of a better word, with philosophy is it gives you structures, it gives you vocabulary, and it gives you guidance, but it doesn't. There's no answer, right? There's no like just do X, Y, and Z, and then everything is fine. And what it does is it tells you ways to make your actions better or worse, not perfect or a perfect failure. So all you can really do is come to understand the theories, employ them to the best of your ability, know that you're still going to make mistakes, and then hopefully the vocabulary of the philosophy allows you to improve a little bit the next time you're in a similar situation. It's really not black and white. It's not up or down, yes or no. It's more like better or worse. And so if you can just get used to the concept of better or worse instead of right or wrong, that I think you'll be on the right path.
We are all cheaty in that respect. Look, the audiobook of your book, it has you alongside lots of people from The Good Place. It's got you alongside Kirsten Bell, William Jackson Harper, Ted Danson, Darcy Carden. Does this make you worry that when people find out about that, you're not going to sell that many physical copies? Everyone's going to want to hear that instead.
Yes, it absolutely does. And by the way, if you buy the audiobook, I'm happy. Please buy the audiobook. It's probably more fun than to actually read the book at some level, because it's got a lot of excellent famous people, including the lead singer of Rush, Geddy Lee, reading one of his own lyrics, which is a great surprise. But I don't particularly care how people absorb it if they are absorbing it. I mean, I would be the whole. By the way, all of the money from the book is going to charity. So any money that anybody spends on any aspect of the book is totally fine with me. It's just more money that goes to worthy causes.
Wonderful. And we didn't even get onto the trolley problem, and I did want to. Never mind. Michael Schur, thank you very much indeed. Yes, thanks very, very much for being with us. And How to Be Perfect, the correct answer to every moral question, is out now.
Thank you.